Hello everyone, my name is Victor Chng. I'm the founder of Yoga in Asia, and I'm doing an interview with Dr. Yaron Seidman, the founder of Hunyuan medicine. I'm now in Hong Kong and I'm doing an interview with him. He's in the US on the East Coast at Connecticut right now. And I'm very happy that Yaron is able to take some time off his busy schedule to actually come on to discuss with us on a very important topic on women's health. Um, I'm a yoga teacher, so my focus is really to bring across the understanding on how yoga could actually uh, help an individual to gain a better body. And in that respect, um, looking at medicine is one of a critical way for us to understand the functions of the body. So I have been also studying Chinese medicine, and I come across Yaron's work, which is pretty amazing. And let me just give a very brief introduction of who Dr. Yaron Seidman is. He started studying Chinese medicine in 1989, and he has really gone all over the world to acquire knowledge on this ancient knowledge. He has primarily, go into countries like New Zealand, and he has gone to China several times, including Beijing, including Guangxi, including the western part of China, Chengdu, and Sichuan provinces, and he has met great masters, great physicians in China. In fact, he actually is able to read and write Chinese, both modern Chinese as well as classical Chinese, which is really amazing. And he could actually memorize, Huangdi Neijing, verses of Huangdi Neijing. He is able to read and even comprehend the ancient classical Chinese. So when I found his work, I find him really an amazing figure, and I thought it is really good and wonderful for us to listen on his view on ancient Chinese medicine principle. How could we actually use this ancient knowledge and be applied in the modern world today? So thank you, Yaron, for your time. And let us start by talking a little bit more about helping um, modern women to understand more about their own body. According to Chinese medicine, how does Chinese medicine view the differences between a man's body and a woman's body?
Well, first, thank you for having me and for the very kind introduction. Um, the question that you pose obviously is a very straightforward question. What's the difference between a man and a woman? But I think maybe it's first important to get a little overview on how does Chinese medicine see the human body and the life of the person, which is actually the same for a man and a woman. Meaning men and women both have a body with organs, with lungs. Of course, some organs are different. Women only have uterus, the men don't have uterus, this kind of thing. But most of the other organs of the body and the life that a person have, men and women, are the same. However, in Chinese medicine, a more classical kind of Chinese medicine, the way we see the body and the way we look at life is different than the way we see it in modern time. So maybe I think a brief introduction on how do we see in Chinese medicine the human body and life is a good idea, and then from there start to explain then what's the difference between a man and a woman. Because right now, with the modern view of the body, the difference is simply that the male has the male genitalia and the female has female genitalia, and that's the difference. But of course, in Chinese medicine, we do have a different view of the body and life and health, and then the women and men has certain differences that are are different than the modern way we think of things. So this is what I think. Like a good place to start is a general overview about the body and life, and then from there make the difference.
Yeah.
Does that
Could you
sounds okay?
please help us to understand a little bit more about this principle of life?
Okay, so just gonna put the whiteboard here so I can draw things on the whiteboard when I explain. The modern way that we learn about ourself, our body, and our life is a rather physical one. Meaning we have a physical body with organs and things like that, and there's hormones, and there's blood, and there's nerves, and this is how the whole thing is working. There's like a mechanical aspect to it that makes things work. However, Chinese medicine not necessarily denies that. Of course, everybody knows that we have a body, but Chinese medicine also puts consideration to what we call the life of the person, or try to come at a principle. What does it mean to be alive? How does it look? And of course, when we do this principle, we try not to make it only philosophical, spiritual kind of a principle, like almost religious principle, but instead we try to make a medical principle, meaning practically how does life work, and then from that we try to deduce the medicine itself, meaning how to use the techniques, the herbs, the acupuncture, and so forth. The way we look at life as part of our body is something that we call a cyclical motion. And I'm drawing here on the whiteboard a circle, as much as I can be a good drawer. We call this a cyclical motion, this life principle, because it's a motion that repeats itself endlessly. That's why it's like a circle that goes on and on and on. It doesn't have a beginning and end point. It keeps on going. And we call this circle unification-separation circle. So I'm writing number 1 at the bottom and number 2 at the top to represent that in this cyclical motion there is a shift from this phase to the other, back and forth, back and forth. And we describe these two phases that we shift back and forth from as unification, or one, like there's only one thing, and two, as if there are two things, like two separate things. Physically, what it means is, or practically what it means, when we're alive, our body goes into a sleep every night, and this is a state that we call unification. Heaven and earth has a certain motion to it, or activity. The stars are revolving, the sun, the moon, whatever is happening. And my body is asleep, lying on the earth like this, not moving. It's going together with heaven and earth. This is why we call it unification. But then, when we wake up, we actually go out of this state into what we call separation state, which means heaven and earth still rotate and revolve with the same pattern as before when we were sleeping. But now my heart starts to discharge emotions, and I feel I'm individual, and I want to go in a different direction. I don't want to lie down like the rock on the ground, but rather I want to start moving and separating from nature. Separating from nature means we're still in nature, but we're not united with it together, unconscious, but rather I'm separated so I can look at you now, for example, and talk to you. Because if I were to sleep right now, I couldn't talk to you. I would be united with you together. So you talk to me and it feels like I'm the rock. Like you talk to me and there's no response if I'm asleep. But if I separate, which means my heart wake up, I can start recognize images, and so we start to recognize each other. This is called a separation state. And we go through this state back and forth all our life. And everybody does that. We go to sleep, we wake up, go to sleep, wake up. Everybody does that. This is the initial concept that we call a unification separation principle. And everybody is doing it. A man and a woman. We're all doing it. All living things actually doing it in nature. But now, when we are born and we get our physical body, we start realizing that the body's activities are in order to fulfill this task of unification and separation, at least on a very fundamental level. And I'm making a very long story very short right now because we don't have a lot of time. But the reason that we have a physical body is so we can separate, wake up, walk to the tree and get an apple, and then I have different organs in the body that I take the apple in, chew it, take the energy from it, and unify with the energy to make the energy mine. This is, of course, on a very existential level, the reason that we have a body, to be able to separate, wake up, go to nature, get energy, and then bring the energy in and make the energy mine. It involves many different processes and organs in the body to do all these activities. And so when we look at the circle that I have here on the left side, not only is that it means that I'm going to sleep and I'm waking up, but on this process of waking up, there are many different organs and systems in the body that participate in the activities, including the skeletal, the muscles, the skin, everything that helps me wake up and start walking and going there. And on the right side of the circle, we have many other organs and hormones and blood and everything that help us participate in this unification process. On the right side of the circle, I'm drawing an arrow on the right side of the circle. So like when I eat food, the whole digestive system, the whole metabolic system, that I take the nutrients from the food, that I'm binding with it and I make this energy mine, all many different organs inside the body, they all participated. Now the reason that I'm telling you all this story, and it's not in great detail because there is a lot of detail in it that we can't really go into right now, but it's just to give you a sense that when we look at the physical body, it's not really any more compartment or like broken into pieces, but rather there is a cohesive whole. There is a purpose for the entire body to do this activity and then the unification activity, meaning the separation activity and unification activity. And so these start to be a little bit different view of life and body and health than the modern way that we look at the body as just compartment. And that's why at the beginning when you asked me the question, what's the difference between a man and a woman? I said as far as modern medicine is concerned, man has male genitalia and female has uterus and female genitalia, meaning this compartment is different and that's it. But actually for us in Chinese medicine, where we see this life principle and the physical body as a whole, and they are very much connected together, that's where we start seeing difference between male and female to be different. It's not just that a woman has a uterus and a man has testicles. This is not, of course, physically it's the difference, but this is not where the difference entirely lies. So this is why we just needed this general introduction of the circle and the body connected to unification separation. Again, there's a lot of information there. It's right now we're not going into it in great detail. But when we look at the circle and the unification separation principle, this circle actually means the entire human body with all the different organs that help us separate on the left side of the circle and some other organs and hormones and other things that help us unify on the right side of the circle. So physically, all these actions that we do in the body go into this circle. In the entire circle, a man and a woman are the same. We all have a head, we have arms and legs, skin, muscle, skeleton, lungs, kidneys. All these functions that help us do unification and separation are actually the same for men and women. We all go to sleep, we all wake up, we all eat breakfast, drink coffee or tea or whatever we do. Men and women actually in many areas are exactly the same. We all have a heart, we all have emotions, even though of course men sometimes behave a little differently than women. There are slight differences, but the general scheme of things is the same. However, when men and women start to be different is because they need to be complementary, meaning the man and the woman need to meet in order to be able to create a new life. And this is like when we say getting pregnant, all the fertility issues and things like that. Now, in order for a man and a woman to meet and create a new life, this is where the difference lies. This is where there is a difference between a man and a woman. And this difference is on a few different levels here in this short interview. Of course, we'll just get into it as much as possible, but there's much information to that as well. When we create a new life, it actually, and this is what we do when we conceive. I'm starting in that direction in order to get into what's the difference between a man and a woman. First, we need to understand, like, what does it take to make a new life? Why do we need a man and a woman, or a male and a female kind of energy? Of course, with modern technology, you can have, same-sex relationship and get pregnant artificially, but still, you will need a sperm and an egg to get pregnant, even if you have, let's say, same-sex couple. But you still need the male energy and the female energy to create a new life. When we look at this image here on the left side of unification and separation, this is actually how life looks like. It needs to separate and it needs to unite on an existential level. I need to separate to reach to the nature, to the apple tree, and then I need to take the energy into my body to unite with it. This thing that we call separation, unification, circle actually starts at conception. This is how life looks like. Whereas if we compare our life in the body to a body that has no life into it, the state that a body without life finds itself is what we call a straight line that I draw here at the bottom of the circle. There's no cyclical motion. When we look at the cadaver, it's not waking up to go to nature, but rather is constantly in unification with nature. There is no separation movement. When we are alive, however, the body that we have and the life that we have behave like this, that we separate in order to unite, to bring energy back in. We separate to nature to bring energy back in. So what happened at conception, what we actually create with an embryo, is not just a piece of material, like there's an embryo, it's some cell, some material, but rather this embryo has life to it, which means it can separate and unite. Separate and unite. However, if you take this embryo and you put it on the table, the embryo will only live for 2 minutes because it does not have the body yet. There's no place to put air into the embryo, or apples, or food, or water. That's why the life that it has is very limited. In contrast, when this embryo develops into a full body, the head, the neck, the lungs, the stomach, everything, when this baby comes out, immediately it can start connecting to nature, to eat, to breathe, to drink. What we just said, harvesting a lot of energy and make it mine so it can live another day and another day and another day. But this separation and unification that we see happens right at conception. And actually it combines two halves. It combines a separation principle from the man and a unification principle from the woman. And this is where we start seeing the difference between a man and a woman. A woman embodies, even though the body is the same almost like a man, with the lungs and heart and everything, when it starts getting to a certain part of the woman and a certain part of the men start to deliver in procreation and making future generation, that is. The men start to generate separation principle, the women start to generate unification principle. So in other words, if you look at a man and a woman get together, the man is projecting outwards, meaning the sperm needs to be ejaculated. This is all separation movement. And when we look at the circle, let me just create here a new circle. And I'm going now into your question, comparing a man and a woman. What's the difference from a man and a woman? When we look at this circle, and trying to have babies, a man and a woman get together to create a new life, a life and a baby. The men generate what we call a separation principle or a separation pivot, which finds itself at the top of the circle. This is where the most separation is actually also when we go to the bathroom and we urinate. This is also where the sperm comes out. This all finds itself at the top of the circle. In Chinese medicine, we call this area of the circle the Taiyang department, and the organs involved are the small intestine and the urinary bladder. And it means this is where water starts to separate from the body, like where we urinate. But actually for men, this is also where the sperm comes out and it separates physically, like urine separating out of the body. The purpose of which, of course, is to reach into the woman, to go inside into the woman where it can fertilize the egg. When we look at the woman, however, when we compare the woman to the man right now, a woman, in order to create a new life, separate an egg from the ovary, and the egg moves from the side of the body towards the center of the body. It's actually very different than the sperm of the man. The egg is not supposed to go out and being ejaculated outside of the body. To the contrast, it moves from the side of the body. The ovaries are like on the sides of the abdomen, and the eggs, or one egg at a time, is moving towards the center line. And this is where, of course not exactly in the center, but this is where the pregnancy will take place. The fertilization may occur inside the tube, but then the fertilized embryo will start to travel into the uterus, and this is where the pregnancy is going to take place. So when we draw it on the circle, we say the woman, when she separates a pivot, the male pivot was with the sperm separating outside of the body. The woman separated a pivot actually inside the body, into the body. Of course, the egg is in the body originally, but as if it's moving more towards the center, not moving out of the body. And you can see right from the path where man and a woman start to create a new life that they behave differently. The man exerts a separation principle outwards, while the woman bring a unification principle inward. At the end, and I'm drawing another circle here, if that was the embryo, this circle at the bottom right, the man with his sperm traveling inside the egg, right? Let's say this is a sperm. I'm trying to make a picture of a sperm. He brings such an energy into the egg that help separate. And I'm drawing arrows going from the center towards the exterior. This is what the man brings to this story of creating a new life. Whereas the woman, which brings the egg, which is outside, bring energy, and I'm drawing arrows from the outside, pointing towards the center. Energy that brings life into the center. This is what we call creating a new life, like two halves to the story. The woman brings unification principle into this creation, and the man brings a sperm inside that creates a separation principle. This unification and separation that we have together, this is what we call life. And before we drew it as a flat circle, going up on the left side, coming down on the right side, but it actually means that the energy from the center wants to separate, and then the energy from the outside wants to come back into the center. This is the male and female principle, and this is how they're actually very, very different. We say the woman corresponds to the lunar activities, the male corresponds to the solar activities. So these are like the two main heavenly phenomena that we have, other than the stars and constellation. But at least from Chinese medicine point of view, we say physically the men and women are the same, except some organs, but really there is a big difference where a woman conforms to lunar kind of quality and the male conforms to solar qualities, which result in many differences. One of which, for example, is that male can ejaculate every day. Of course, if he's very sick, maybe he can't, but generally can ejaculate every day. A woman cannot discharge an egg every day. It's only about once a month, when her body conforms to lunar cycles and gets the strongest. That's when the body allows some pivot to break. This is what we call ovulation. Like the egg breaks from the ovary to start its own life. This is called, and here this is how I describe the difference first between a man and a woman according to Chinese medicine, not just saying you have ovaries and a man has testicles, but rather there's a whole energetical issue that the man and the woman need to be different in order to be able to create new life. This is why we have to be different. If you take two males together or two females together, you only get unification plus unification or separation plus separation. You cannot have a heartbeat, meaning which is like going out and coming back in. And this is what happens when we create a new life. Very soon on the ultrasound you can see a heartbeat which is out, in, this kind of emotion. So this is the answer to your question. What's the difference between a man and a woman? This is how we see it in
So,
Chinese medicine.
you mentioned about men's behaving more like the solar, the sun cycle, and women taking the characteristic more like the moon. And one of the things about the moon is that it goes through different phases in the month, and therefore women, in a way, has a more rhythmic kind of response. Yeah, and the body is going through very clear phases of changes throughout her whole life. Can you maybe help us to understand a little bit on the different phases of a woman's life, like taking us through to different stages from puberty, to maybe, womanhood, and then to the menopausal state. How does Chinese medicine look at the entire uh, um, different phases, yeah, of a woman's life?
Right, I mean, starting from ancient classics like the Suwen, like the Neijing Suwen, there is a description of women life progresses in cycles of 7 years, men's life progresses in cycles of 8 years. So there is this attempt to describe a certain evolutionary process within our life, meaning you look at me first, I'm just an infant, then I'm a toddler, then I'm a little boy, then I become mature, and then this period takes long time, but then eventually I start to decline, get old until we reach the end of our life. Right now, this is of course in common to men and women, right? Men and women both go through this process of being very young, born very young, growing old, mature, and then getting old and die at the end. But I think the ancient classics, the Suwen, attempt here is to describe a certain situation of how does life unfold for me and what's the story of my life in relationship to the next life, to the next life, to the next life. So really, it's not that the Suwen just want to say, look, from 7 to 14 is like this, from 14 to 21 is like this, even though there is this description. But rather, there is an overarching understanding of a certain situation, and the situation is as follows. The first phase is when we are created by our parents, as we just described before with this picture of an embryo here. And immediately following that, there's a phase that lasts about 9 months of pregnancy, where our body is being developed, matched together with our life, and get ready to our life in this realm, in this world, nature. So then when the baby comes out, this is where our story begins, in this world here. The body now is not taking automatically food through the umbilical cord, but rather needs to start living in unification-separation mode, going to the apple tree, eating an apple, going again to the apple tree, eating another apple. This is called the unification-separation mode, that we live all our life like this. But the ancient texts make a clear observation. It says, look, when we're an infant, this physical vessel is actually not fully mature. It is already ready to breathe on its own, to take breast milk from the mother and things like that. So it doesn't need an umbilical cord, but it still can't walk. It still can't walk to the tree. So there is a phase of growing not just physically, but also emotionally, the heart, the spirit, everything has to mature until a certain age where then creating a new life become possible. This is really the description in the Suwen, and this has to do with the man and the women with a certain phase in their teenage years, we would call it. Either when the period starts for a woman or there's a certain puberty phase for men. Of course, modern society also involve all kind of other issues. So like in ancient societies, kids will get married really early when they're early teenagers. 13, 15, but of course with modern customs this become unacceptable, so we're waiting at least until we're 18 or 20, but most often we get married when we're in our 30s or 40s. This is really not so much a physical reality, but it's a social reality. We are creating this social reality. But physically speaking, and this is what the Su Wen, the ancient Chinese medicine text describe, is the physical growth, meaning at a certain phase of puberty, there is now an ability to create a new life, because before there is not this ability. The woman or the young woman doesn't discharge eggs yet, like she doesn't break a pivot as we described here. I'm just showing the arrow at the bottom of the circle. The woman breaks an egg. This start happening at a certain phase where tentatively a baby can be conceived. Of course, if it happens at a very, very early stage, this is very dangerous for the woman. Her physical body is not fully ready yet, but tentatively the egg could create a baby. So this is the phase that the woman goes into where she starts doing splitting. And this phase lasts for about 30 years, sometimes 40 years, until the woman stops splitting. Because every time a woman splits a piece of this ability, it comes from our own ability to live. And that's why when the body starts to decline and gets weaker and weaker, the body gives a command, now we have to stop splitting. This is what we call menopause. But this phase between puberty or start ovulating and stop ovulating, of course, is very different from one woman to the other, and it has to do with how healthy the woman is. The healthier she is, the stronger she is, it actually going to last longer and longer, and she might get into menopause when she's 59. If the body has difficult time throughout life and it wears down faster, then sometimes menopause comes at the late 30s, like 10, 20 years earlier. So this period of being fertile or ovulating, this is really the main period that we need to differentiate. There are three parts to our life: before, during, and after. Meaning before a woman starts to ovulate, all these years that she ovulates, and then the period is coming in that time, and when the ovulation and the period stop, and after until our last day. These are like the three phases that we go through our life. Our goal is, of course, to make the middle phase as long as possible, because this shows that the person is stronger and stronger. It's not like today. Also, because of all kinds of customs, some people say, the period is very uncomfortable, I just want to stop, get it over with, because it's uncomfortable. In reality, the period is a reflection of the ovulation. The ovulation is a reflection of how strong we are, and everybody wants to be stronger. This is our ultimate objective. Of course, after we stop ovulating, this does not mean that we're very weak. It just means that the recharging or the bottom of the circle is now weak enough to not allow any more. But also in the last phase of our life, there could be a very weak state, that the woman is very weak, and this could be that the woman is very strong. So also after the period stop and the ovulation stop, we should still maintain our being strong and healthy.
So
So these are the different
yeah,
phases.
so I think it's fair to for us to then say that menstruation and ovulation somehow is very much relating to how healthy a woman is, and maybe you can help us to first understand what do you think is the functions of menstruation for women. What's the meaning of menstruation? What does it serve in terms of the functions of the body in a woman's body?
Now, this is, of course, a short question, but has been debated greatly throughout the ages. So everyone take their best guess at why do I need to bleed here? What's the story with the blood coming out? I think, and this is my personal opinion from as much as I can contemplate Chinese medicine. Uh, what we are talking about here is the health of the person related to ovulation, the consequences of which at the end is if there is a period or not. In other words, if for some reason the ovulation stops, normally 95% or more of the time, the period stops. And modern medicines explain it very well with the hormones. If they fluctuate, if they change, then you will have a period at the end. If they won't change and you don't ovulate, then there's no period. And this is the scenario that you most often see. So first of all, you can see that there is this connection between having a period, being able to ovulate, and how healthy the woman is. So it's not really that the period is on its own, again, a compartment. Remember before we said modern medicine, everything is compartments. Nothing is related to anything. But actually, we think that everything is related to everything as we see in this circle. It's all a cohesive whole. So the same with the period. The reason that we have a period, first of all, is a result of the ovulation. But what kind of a result of the ovulation? The ovulation purpose is to create a new life. It's not just to have fun and get eggs out, but rather we discharge an egg, the same that the man discharges sperm, in order to create a new life. And if this happens, the period does not come. There is no period. If a woman gets pregnant, the period stops for the whole pregnancy, unless of course, if the woman is healthy, not if there is a problem. Sometimes there could be problem, the period still coming. But most of the time, if there is a pregnancy, the life started, the new life started, the period is not coming. So from here we can see that when the period does come, it means that the pregnancy did not take place. Physically, Western medicine shows that all what was building up towards pregnancy, the uterus lining getting thicker and ready for implantation, all this need to be washed out. This is what happened with the period. That's where the bleeding comes from. All the uterus lining is actually being expelled from the body or shed off. And this I merge with Chinese medicine understanding that actually creating new life is something that is dynamic, meaning the woman getting ready to ovulate and maturing the egg, getting the uterus lining thicker and thicker, it's all like a dynamic state that getting ready for life to take place. It's not like you get a uterus lining that is thick, okay, there's no pregnancy, let's just hold on this uterus lining for next month. But rather this whole situation, this will be in a static state. You build the uterus lining and keep it like this for a couple of years until there's pregnancy. But actually, there is like a trajectory for a pregnancy, starting from beginning to mature an egg and a sperm and an egg meeting together and the uterus lining becoming thicker and ready, like the whole life is projecting inwards. This for us we say is a woman conforms to the lunar cycle. Like you said before, it's growing, it has different phases, it gets more mature. This is where the new life needs to start to take place and then start to live on its own. Like the new life will start living on its own now, the baby. Even though it's still inside the uterus, but the life now is moving on its own. But assuming that there is no life moving on its own, this whole trajectory of starting a new life needs to end. And this is where the period comes, which is a necessary phase of the female body to end this phase so it can start a new trajectory. In other words, you have to shed the uterus lining, all the blood to come out, like to finish this, because it's over. There's no life created there. Next month, we start again from the beginning. We call it from the origin. You start this trajectory again and again and again, and if life started, it will continue for the next 9 months, then come out of the body for another 100 years. This is called the trajectory of starting new life. But this is the meaning as far as we can see in Chinese medicine. What is the period for? It is very, very necessary. It needs to end the last phase in order to be able to start the new one. This we call a Jueyin activity. It's not at the very bottom of the circle where the ovulation comes and there should be all this new life starting, but rather this is what we call separation concealed. The inside is not unifying anymore and it starts to separate, and it involves organs like the liver and pericardium and the uterus. These all organs involved in this department of our Chinese medicine model, health model, that now at this point make a calculation. In the ancient classics, the liver in the Su Wen in chapter 8, the liver is said to be the general that needs to do the planning. This is this kind of a planning. We plan, the life needs to start, but it's not. The sperm didn't arrive, the pregnancy didn't arrive. Now the plan is we have to shed the uterus lining, do this bleeding. From tomorrow, we start a new phase, like we start a new trajectory to try to make a new life. So this is really the meaning of the period. What is the meaning? Is to stop this last phase. That, I mean, it's hard to hear, but in the sense of making life, to stop that last phase that was unsuccessful, meaning unsuccessful with no new life created. Of course, for us in modern society, we don't want to get pregnant every month or every year. After 20 years, we have 20 kids. In ancient society, that was very common. A woman will just get pregnant all the time. At the end of our life, she has 25 kids. But of course, modern society is different. But physically, in the body, the general job, the liver or this doing this plan, is to say, look, the last phase didn't end up in a new life. We need to end this situation. This is the period, so we can start a new cycle. This is the meaning of clearing the old, stopping the old, so we can start the
Okay,
new
so
one.
let us focus more closer to the issue of menstruation, because we clearly know that for many women's experience, menstruation is sort of like another day. Sometimes period comes undetectable in very early stages of their life when they first have menstruation, and it becomes more and more complicated. And what do you think is the main contributing factors to all these complications that comes much later in life in the process of menstruation?
Uh, well, I mean, this is also a good question that has a multi-level answer in a few different departments, some of which we didn't touch upon yet, but I'm willing to start talking about that, even though maybe you didn't specifically ask about it. But this question requires few different angles. Like, why would women start having problems with the period? The answer is not always as simple as, well, the hormones are just going crazy. This is like the modern answer. The hormones are just going crazy, and that's why. Which, in my mind, is kind of like a general answer that means nothing. Why are the hormones go crazy? Like, nobody knows. We just say the hormones are not right. You measure them, you see that it's too high this, too high that, but we don't know why. Your question goes more to the root of the problem. Like, why is the reason that there's a problem? Not really what's the problem looking like. It's just, why is there a problem? So first I want to describe the issue of the problem, the way we see it when we talk about menstrual problem. And this can come with different ways. Heavy period, light period, irregular period, being very emotional PMS, like a variety of different problems around the period. Each one could mean a different things. But generally speaking, here let me start a new circle. I'm again drawing another circle. And remember, we're talking about the bottom left part of the circle, which is this part, where the period activity is related. Now, and again, there's quite a few things here. I'll just try to be brief and not a very, very long answer. When we look at the body, there are two things happening. We say at the bottom of the circle, where the unification happens, there is something that happens, we call it recharging activities, which means I take energy from nature and I make the energy mine. I eat apples and bananas and chicken and noodles, and most of the material goes in the bathroom, but the energy that I took from it becomes mine. You look at me, there's no trace of apples or noodles or chicken or anything. You just say, that's my life. This conversion of energy from nature to become mine, this is what we call unification, and it is this circle at the bottom of the big circle, small circle that I drew at the bottom of the big circle. This is called the unification activity. This actually means how much life I can hold on to or generate from the food that I'm eating. So when you look at a little kid eating a little bit food, even though he eats a little bit, he still have a long life to live. When you look at an older person, can eat a lot of food, but they can only hold on to a little bit of life. This is, we say, their unification ability has declined with the age. So even though they get more energy into the body, they can hold on to less when you get older and older. This is the story of the unification at the bottom of the circle. Under the unification, we have all the rest of the body as we explained before, and you see I'm drawing a line all around the circle that involved all the different parts of the body doing all sorts of functions. One of them is this function at the bottom left side of the circle, which involved the liver and the uterus and the period. But the body, of course, has many other activities: to walk, to go to the apple tree, to eat stuff, to digest things, to think, to feel, all kind of things. But I'm just making you here a point that there is the body, and now we're talking about the period part of the body, which involve the uterus lining, ovaries, and the hormones related to the period. And there is also the recharging ability of the body that we always need to have that. That means how much life I can hold on to. Not just how is my body functioning, but rather how much life I can hold on to. So now when we start talking about, first of all, the period problem, we need to understand that when we talk about this circle, you see the circle around the entire body, the way we look at it in Chinese medicine is that each part of the body needs to function in a proper way. We call it on time. Each body part needs to have a certain speed for its action to happen. Now this is very different than the materialistic modern view of things, which says the piece of the body is here. Like when you look at the lungs, it's a piece of material. Meaning there's no issue of the lungs working too fast or too slow in a certain speed. It's like the lung is there, there's some exchange happening, everybody knows that. The oxygen exchange with the blood in the lungs. But how fast, if it happens faster or slower, this is not normally is not considered, even though this is why disease will start. So if the exchange start to happen too slow, the person start feeling they suffocate. Like as if there's not enough air. In reality, the air is exactly the same, but the person feels as if it's suffocating. This is just the example of the lungs, but of course everything in the body is the same. The stomach is like this. Everything has a certain speed that if it works in that speed, the person feels great. If it works too slow, I start feeling indigestion. If it works too fast, I start feeling thirsty. And all these symptoms that we would associate them as feeling not well. Now the same is when we talk about the period. When we look at this department that we call the Jueyin department here at the bottom left side of the circle, it needs to move on time. When that phase comes, the last cycle wasn't successful with the pregnancy, there's no new life created. Now the liver is doing calculation. I have to end it and shed the uterus lining, and I have to prepare the next cycle. There is a certain speed that this needs to happen. It doesn't matter. Let's just call it every 28 days, and it needs to happen in 5 days. Let's just assume right now that that's the speed. If the calculations start to be off, we say the Jueyin department, this department at the bottom left, is not making the right calculation. All of a sudden it brings the period after 20 days instead of 28 days. This we call too fast. It accelerates the movement to be too early. Or let's say the period comes after 35 days. It miscalculated, makes it too late. Now, when we start talking about period problem being too early or too late, it is this kind of a problem of the speed is not being on time. The Jueyin calculation is not on time. But now, oftentimes there is no Jueyin problem. Oftentimes the problem is at the bottom of the circle with the recharging. If the recharging is too weak, then it takes longer to mature one egg. So the ovulation, instead of happening on day 12, it happens on day 20. And the period does come 12, 14 days later. So when you just look at the period coming after 34 or 40 days, you might mistake it and think that the Jueyin, or this department on the bottom left, is running too slow. But actually, it means that the unification is too weak and the ovulation happens later. So if the luteal phase is correct, the luteal phase is from after ovulation until the period. If this phase is correct, there is no Jueyin problem, even if the period is early or late. It's actually the correct calculation. It is related to the ovulation, which belongs to the bottom of the circle. If it has enough energy to ovulate on time, or does it require longer until there's enough energy to ovulate? So these are the two things that we need to start to calculate when we assess problems with the period. Is it a Jueyin problem? It means this department just cannot calculate right. It speeds up or slows down. Or is it really that the bottom meaning the body's ability to recharge, or the bottom of the circle is too weak and it just takes longer and longer to ovulate? Then there is no Jueyin problem. Now this description that I just gave you, even though it sounds long, it's actually very, very brief because there's a lot of things revolving here. But this just described the period problem physically, meaning in relation to ability to ovulate, or is there a miscalculation of moving too fast or too slow. There is an entire other department that we didn't touch upon at all, and this is what we call the fire inner circle. So I'm drawing another circle at the middle of the other circle. This relates to the heart emotions, or what we call the heart dichotomy, or our branch, the branch of medicine we call Shinfa, or heart method. And this department, actually the Jueyin, is very closely related to this department. When and this is, again, it's a long topic, we really cannot cover it here in a few minutes, but just here sharing the bottom line. When the heart, for one reason or the other, which we don't describe here, but when the heart starts to discharge too much energy with emotions that are, we call them inappropriate. Inappropriate means there is a certain action that I need to do, let's say take the pen, and it requires about half an ounce of energy, and instead I'm using 20 ounces of energy to take this pen to me. This is called using too much energy for this action. This happens with the heart a lot. We call it the dichotomy. The heart dichotomy discharges too far, and we start making assessments that I need more energy for this action. This at the end also make my recharging ability weaker, but it also makes the Jueyin separate too fast. Because part of the Jueyin calculation mode, like should I do that fast or that fast, has to do with the heart feeling at ease or not at ease. And these things, of course, build up throughout our life. It's not something that started yesterday. And this is the root for many period problems. So even if the bottom is not so weak yet, and the woman, let's say, is 20, let's say 20-year-old woman, she's very young. Her bottom, the recharging ability is very strong. She's going to live for another 100 years. And yet the period is very painful or is very irregular. This is not because the recharging is weak and she can't ovulate, but rather this often has to do with this fire inner circle and a large dichotomy, like being very emotional and putting a lot of energy into things emotionally, that then when the period comes, the movements start to be erratic, either very painful, very clotty, or things of that nature. So right now, I shared with you like few different elements that need to be calculated. Where is the source of the problem? Is it the hard dichotomy and that kind of an issue? Is it the bottom of the circle that is too weak and ovulation takes too long? Or is it really just a Jueyin problem that physically there's now a miscalculation problem? He's moving too fast or too slow. These are like the three different roots of having period problem of different kinds. Period is too late, period is too early, period is too painful, the PMS is too strong, or a lot of clots. Or just earlier today I had a patient that has a period problem. When she comes, the blood just gushes out and she feels like passing out, like to an extreme. Such heavy bleeding, you feel like fainting. So I just saw this one patient earlier today. So again, there are many different issues with the period, and these are typically the three different reasons that will make some problems or
So do
others.
you sort of have different medical strategy to address each of these issues which you have just described?
Yeah, certainly. So I mean, the key to success, uh, the bottom line to success is to try to get as healthy as possible. The only question is what is our concept of health and how to get there, like what's the method. But this is the objective. The objective is we need to get as healthy as possible. That's how we resolve. It's not that someone has, let's say, very heavy period and the objective is just to make it not heavy. Like, I don't care what's going to happen to the patient. She's going to be sick, feel miserable. As long as the period is not heavy, then I'm successful. This is not our strategy. The strategy is the person has to get as healthy as possible, and we need to figure out what's the reason. So this is why making a correct evaluation, if it's this problem, meaning in the heart, or if it's a Jueyin problem, or if it's the ovulation and the bottom of the circle problem, this is critical to try to make the correct assessment. Otherwise, we're just guessing. But if we can pinpoint that really this is the reason where it starts, then each part has a remedy. If it's with herbs, for the outer circle, normally we can address it with herbs. If it's in the inner circle, the herbs can't get there. This we have to do what we call Shinfa methods or heart method, how to retrain the heart to conserve energy, and this gradually will show the benefit. But so each one of them has their methodology. But so with using herbs, for example, if the Jueyin miscalculates and it's moving too fast, we have to use a strategy that slows down the Jueyin. If on the other hand, the Jueyin is moving too slow, you need to have a different strategy with herbs to help it speed up. At the end, the objective is to be on time. If it's too fast, you need to slow it down. If it's too slow, you need to speed it up. And you always have to be on top of it very carefully, because if it's slow and you speed it up to the right place, you need to know when to stop. Otherwise, if you keep on speeding it up, then you get the other problem. Then it starts running too fast. So it's not even that if it's too slow, just take these herbs, because at one point you need to know when to stop them. You can't just keep on taking them, then you start having another problem. When the problem is with the bottom of the circle, what we call the Shaoyin energy or the recharging ability, we need an entirely different strategy we call unification strategy. So I'm doing an arrow at the bottom right of the circle. These are a kind of formulas that help the body increase its recharging ability. This we call unification strategy. And this will help make the ovulation on time. That's why the period will be on time, because the ovulation is on time. So again, between the different things that we can do with the herbs or the Shinfa, the heart method, first we need to pinpoint where the problem is. Then we need to come up with the treatment principle, the strategy, and the plan. These are the different treatments.
I guess the audience is also trying to get some tips from you as to how do you think women can keep themselves healthy?
Well, this is a good and easy question that again you can answer very briefly, or you can also answer it very thoroughly because it has many different aspects of the lifestyle, of what we should do and what we shouldn't do. I think the short answer is everybody needs to try to learn as much as possible. The more we know, the more we are equipped to do the right thing versus the wrong thing. This is like the general guideline. Some people in the modern society just say, look, I'm just looking for a short answer because I don't have time. I'm busy. I'm working 20 hours a day. My life is very busy. Just tell me if I need to eat an apple or a carrot. This is what I think is not the good approach. Meaning, I just want, give me something to do, go home to do. This is what many people want. And it has short-term benefit. Let's say apples do help. But then people see, look, I'm still sick and I'm still having now developed diabetes or something else. The real strategy is to acquire as much knowledge as possible so I have answer to many things. Like when should I exercise? What kind of food should I eat? How much intercourse is appropriate? There's like many questions to be answered. Each one has a proper answer. But it's not always just like a tip for something. I would start and say, like if we wanted to start somewhere, look, there are many things that we need to know, but where should we start? Like where is there a good place to start? What is needed a lot in the society is this issue of the fire inner circle, this Shinfa part. Because in our modern society, everybody likes to discharge a lot of emotions. In work, it's very stressful. Everybody is high strung. There's a lot of emotions going on. In the family, everybody likes to fight all the time. Which means that the spending of energy here in the center for us in modern society is oftentimes a lot, much more than what it should. And that leads to a lot of problems, including very often period problems. The period being painful, the PMS is very intense. It's because when we get to this phase of the planning, where I need to shed the uterus lining and I need to prepare for the next cycle, having the circle, the inner circle weak is playing a major role. That's why the PMS is very heavy and that's why periods are a problem very often to see. So what I would recommend to people is to start to inquire about how to do this heart training, how to cultivate it. I give tools here, I'm just sharing with you, like on the website hunyuan.org, the clinic's website. If you just scroll on the homepage down, there's a video that I posted there about the heart cultivation. It's about 20 minutes, you can watch it. There is also a Shinfa app that we develop you can download to your phone and start practicing it. It just costs a few dollars. And so these are the kind of things that you don't really need a doctor to evaluate you all the time. You actually do it by yourself and it doesn't cost anything. So it doesn't even cost extra like to buy organic super expensive food. It doesn't cost anything. It's just we are kind of working our heart, and it is a process that sometimes is lengthy, but we can start at any time and it doesn't cost anything. This is, I
Okay,
think,
so
is a good place an easy place
I
to
guess our
start.
audience are not very clear so much, or even the term Shinfa is rather foreign as an idea. maybe you can help us to understand what's the benefit of doing this simple? What does it do for a person if they start practicing it? What kind of sort of like achievement or result will someone get?
It's like this. Let's say there's two of me. There are two Dr. Seidmans, and they sit next to each other. And Victor is telling me something offensive. It doesn't matter what. Something, I don't like you, I hate you. And I start feeling really bad about it. And even after we finish the interview, tomorrow and next week, next month, I'm still thinking of Victor. Remember how he told me in the interview that he hates me? But let's say you say exactly the same thing to Dr. Seidman number two, the one that sits next to me. He absorbs it for a second and says, "Oh, that's very weird. But I tried my best." And as soon as we finished the interview, that Dr. Seidman number two actually forgot it already. He's definitely not thinking about it tomorrow. It's not that he's suppressing it, it's just it didn't phase him. Physically, what happened here between these two, me, right? Me number one and me number two, is that I'm spending energy on it for a long time. Every time when I think of it and I steer my emotions, why did Victor said that to me? It's not nice. It cost me another ounce, another ounce, another ounce, another ounce, another ounce. This energy is not coming from nowhere. It's coming from me. So in other words, the stimulation that you gave was exactly the same to me number one and to me number two. And yet number two only spent 1 ounce. And me number one spent 1 kilo of energy on the same stimulation. The end result of doing this Shinfa practice, of practicing my heart dichotomy to be smaller and smaller, is to make this number one to be like number two. It's not about suppressing my emotion. Number two doesn't suppress the emotion. It really didn't bother him. He only spent 1 ounce. It's not that he's pretending not to be angry. Everybody knows that. Let's say you're an angry person. People tell you, don't be angry, it's not good. So you know how to fake it, how not to be angry. But actually inside the energy is spent exactly the same, even if on the outside we pretend not to be. The Shinfa practice is how to train the heart to conserve. We call it the C principle, how to conserve the energy. Every day we wake up, we have, let's say, 20 ounces energy. We need to conserve it as much as possible, not just spend it liberally. At the end of the day, I'm exhausted. If we push it to an extreme, when the heart dichotomy is really large, to an extreme, and someone gets enraged, they can get a heart attack, die on the spot. Meaning it could be that extreme, but of course this is very rare. Or so sad, crying, sobbing for a few weeks or months, and then all of a sudden you develop a disease from being so, sad for so long. So you can see it, of course, to an extreme case, how very fast it translates into a physical disease. But if it's not that extreme, it just wears us off faster. That's where people don't do the right calculation. In other words, if they just lose a little bit of life, but it doesn't look like a stomach ulcer, it's like we don't care exactly. But this is, I find, in Chinese medicine, we think it's a big mistake. Our life, we need to treasure. It's like precious. You have to keep it like gold in the pocket. You cannot just say, well, I just waste some of it. Everybody normally really misses health when they get sick. When they're still healthy, we kind of abuse it. We don't care. It doesn't matter. I'm healthy. Nothing hurts me. In Chinese medicine, we think it's a mistake. So doing this spending of the heart and we don't feel sick so much, it's a miscalculation. We need to feel like this, number two. Someone stimulate us and we just do the proper action. To get this pen, I only need a little bit of energy. I don't need a huge amount of energy. And this is, it is not an intellectual exercise. like I told you before. It's not, Victor, stop getting angry. You cannot stop. Your whole life, your heart cultivated like this. You cannot stop. You can pretend, but you cannot. Doing Shinfa training, it physically means the heart is now changing. It's not you anymore. It's like the new Victor. It's not like we're pretending. It's not an intellectual exercise. But this is the Shinfa kind of exercise. Of course, it's a very big topic, and we're kind of just briefly mentioning what's the benefit. This is the bottom line. How I can go through the day really not pretending, with conserving the energy, spending very little emotional energy. This is something that needs to be retraining very often. Of course, if you are a farmer, live in the mountains, and nobody ever gets you mad, and you see a very, very peaceful person, sometimes that person doesn't need any Shinfa practice. His heart is in a very good shape. But most of us in modern society, where stress is very prevalent, this is often a very, very good place to start, which is easy, and you don't need a doctor and diagnosis and treatment and herbs and this kind of thing. This is about Shinfa.
Okay. So I guess that's all we have for today. This much time we have, and I really like to thank you for accepting this interview. And I'm sure this will not be the last interview that I will be working with you. More interesting topic is going to come out, particularly focusing on women's health. And just before letting you go, I just want to let the audience knows that you have a couple of books, yeah, great works, very closely related to women's health. One would be the Hunyuan method for fertility, and then curing fertility. And the last one is Hunyuan fertility, conception, babies, and miracles. So, for audience who are really keen in finding out more about Dr. Yaron Seidman's work, you can always go to hunyuan.org. Okay, so thank you very much, Jan, and I hope to have your time again to share with our audience more on women's health. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Victor. I also just want to mention at the chat I added the Shinfa website, which is heartcultivation.com. If people are